External locus of control is classist bullshit. Locus of control is psychology lingo for where a person puts the credit or blame for things in life on themselves or their surroundings. External locus of control is a supposed bad habit that modern counselors and therapists and life coaches and whatever are referring to when they talk about people who blame outside circumstances for their problems. A person with external locus who fails the math test would blame the way the test was written, or the temperature in the room, or a headache, and the person with internal locus would blame themselves. Having a tendency towards either one is wrong, I think, because it doesn't take into account what actually happened. Sometimes the failure might be caused by something on one's own part, and sometimes it might be caused by something outside. Sometimes it's even a mixture of both. But assuming it's always yourself or always your situation means you're not really looking at what actually happened. Suppose in one situation the math test was designed poorly, or the room was too hot to concentrate. Suppose on a different day you just decided not to try hard enough. If you always assume external blame or internal blame, you'd be wrong about one of those scenarios, or both of them. A big reason I hate modern philosophy and psychology is because it turns everything subjective, and it refuses to accept that there's a reality outside oneself, and that, therefore, there's going to be true and false answers to things. You're supposed to have a certain opinion all the time, regardless of what the facts actually are, because actual reality doesn't exist, and your perception of facts is just a reflection of what's inside you. So if you feel blue, you should see a blue door, even if the door is red. And in this case, you should always assume a certain locus of control, either external or preferably internal. There's no being objective and taking things case by case or looking at all the facts. There are people who blame other people and things for their own failures, and that's not good, but it's also not accurate to always blame yourself. You should be objective. If you don't, you risk not being able to locate where the problem really is and trying to fix it, whether it's inside yourself or outside. It can be good to practice self-questioning, since we do have a tendency to avoid self-criticism, and since we may discover something inside us that we do have control over and can therefore fix. But always assuming we cause everything that comes our way is just delusional and leads to being more stuck, since if the problem is outside of us, we waste a bunch of energy trying to change ourselves instead of trying to change the thing. Now, as for classism and poverty. Lots of poor people are accused of having an external locus of control because they have multiple things outside of them that can contribute to their poverty, which they then speak about to others, which is a big no-no. Also, the greater the amount of things the person can find to prove it's not their fault, the more they're accused of making excuses, meaning the more they're able to prove their point, the less they get listened to. The more proof they have, the more that means they made it up, because how many things can possibly go wrong in one's life? Never mind that poverty breeds interest and that the lack of money in one area can cause other areas to be more expensive. For example, a woman who, let's say, has bad health and can't work as often gets less money, so she can't pay the insurance on her car, so she has to start taking Uber, which is more money, which means she has less money for groceries, which means she doesn't eat as much, which means she's tired all the time, so she can't work as hard, so she gets even less money. That's all considered excuse making by people who preach that she has an external locus of control and needs to grow up. Which, yeah, that's kind of disgusting because it blames a poor person for being able to articulate their situation. Accusing poor people of having external locus of control means that any attempt by these people to articulate their position and to study any potential unfairness in the game is considered an unhealthy thinking habit that they should stop. So, a group of farmers who get together and realize that they're starving because their land is being eaten up by an international corporation now have external locus of control, and they need to get back to a healthy mindset, which is trying to see what they could do differently, instead of looking at what's around them. Well, this is impossible if there's no other options, or if the only option for survival is to join a toxic economic game that will only hurt others or the environment instead. But it keeps them on the hamster wheel and not trying to change anything, so it's good, right? Why is an accurate belief about where the control lies considered so wrong and threatening, and who does such a belief threaten? Who benefits when a struggling convenience store owner is told that he can fix his poverty by changing what he does or how he feels, rather than by fighting to change the way the economy works? Assuming an internal locus will erase the awareness that an outside party really does have a lot of power, which is what he wants you to think. Is this why so many rich people pour their money into these books and seminars about self-help and looking inside and blaming oneself and taking responsibility and all that shit? Let's not forget that external locus attitude can also be promoted by the greedy because it also prevents you from discovering what you could change and leads to despair. It's just that it prevents you from trying to change what's outside oneself. So like I said, it's still best to just look at each case individually. However, I do feel like internal locus of control is promoted more strongly because it's easier to victim blame. And victim blamers assume the locus of control is the cause rather than the result of the person's good or bad fortune. Much like with the book The Secret and the idea of the law of attraction, the internal locus of control is assumed to be what makes you happy and successful, rather than being a result of a fortunate life. This theory ignores the fact that some people give themselves credit for good situations only because they don't want to admit that they're susceptible to being in the bad ones. It also helps them foist responsibility for bad times on others so they don't feel obligated to help. They can just tell them to help themselves. Ironically, accusing someone of having the wrong locus of control is itself an example of having an external locus. If you're blaming all these poor people for making their own lives and your lives and the economy a big mess, aren't you the one who's blaming others? As usual, it got political. If you like this episode and want to see more, then just like, share, and subscribe. But don't say I told you to because, well, we wouldn't want to have an external locus of control now, would we?